in the house. I was in the house bored, and I decided to do my makeup and record it. But I'm actually lying. This was actually very well planned and thought out, and I was just trying to make it not seem as serious as it was. But I purchased the Pat McGrath Labs foundation, and I've been wearing it for a few days, and it took me a couple of times to actually wear this foundation to figure out if I liked it or not. I'm in the shade range between MD22 and MD24. MD22 is neutral, 23 is yellow, and 24 is red tone. So because I've had breakouts on my cheeks, I decided to go with the 24 because it gives me less, I don't have to correct as much because it already has like that redder undertone, and I actually think it's a really, really good match. So because this foundation is a light to medium coverage foundation, I do recommend either using your fingers or using a brush. I would not use a sponge because it would be pointless, because this foundation is super, super light. It does still give you coverage though. So if you're like a full coverage, you don't want to see any parts of your skin type of girl, I wouldn't recommend it, but it's such a beautiful foundation. Alright, so now I'm doing my brows. I'm using the Clear Brow Gel by Anastasia, and I'm just brushing my brows upward. Dang it, my phone. And so now starts my favorite part of my makeup routine, which is concealing. And the first concealer I'm going to use is the Nars Radiant Creamy Concealer in the color Walnut. I use this shade more as a corrector type shade. I wouldn't use it with every single concealer because this is really, dang it, my phone again, is really yellow. So if I don't use a full enough coverage concealer, you can see the yellow come through a lot more, and I personally don't like that look. So because the concealer that I'm using will balance out this color, I'm using Walnut under the eyes. So this is also another shade that I would put like around my mouth or on my cheeks, like if I had any dark areas that I wanted to conceal. So I do apply the concealer with a concealer brush, and then I blend out the edges with a beauty blender, and I like to pat it in to blend it so that I don't have to go over it with a beauty blender, because I want to keep as much of the coverage as possible. And so I found that this is the best way to do that. I also sometimes will apply my concealer with a regular foundation brush. Alright, so now I am using the Pat McGrath concealer in the shade M17. So I picked all these colors out online because quarantine, so I couldn't try any of them in person. So I initially ordered the shades MD22 and M20. MD22 was so dark for under the eyes, and I tried to make it work and I hated it. It was extremely neutral, but I really liked the consistency of the concealer and how easily it blended out. So I also had M20, which is described as having like a yellow undertone, but on me it was very, very red. So like I said, I don't like having anything either too red or too yellow under my eyes. So I went back and just read through the shade descriptions and saw that M17 was more of like the color that I was looking for, and I was worried that it would be way too light, but when it came, it was actually perfect. So it's a really good shade range. You can find a lot of different shades to use for different parts of the face, but I do recommend looking in store first. And I do want to pick up some other colors. I just don't know which ones those are yet. So yeah, stay tuned for that. But this concealer is amazing. So what I'm going to do next is my brows, and I'm using the Benefit Precisely My Brow in the shade 4. And so next I sprayed my face with the Tatcha Skin Mist again, and I just find that this helps things blend out a little bit easier, especially on my dry skin, and particularly under my eyes where it's really, really dry. If you have very oily skin, I probably would not recommend that you do this step, but it really, really helps with my dry under eyes if I spray something on it. And even though this concealer is very, very creamy, I would not say that it's hydrating, at least not on me. When it does dry down, I do feel somewhat of a tightness under the eyes, which is not a bad thing. But, you know, for me, it was just a little drying. So, I wanted to hydrate it up. Alright, so here I am, still blending the edges and making sure everything looks good. And then for the last step of my concealer, I take the concealer brush and I put the lightest shade that I use, which in this case was the M17, and I put it directly into the creases, folds, or the indentions. I'm not sure what they called, but I put them directly into that little line, and then I blended some more. So next I'm using my Bobbi Brown University palette, and really this is just a Bobbi Brown stick foundation. I'm using the colors Chestnut and Espresso mixed together, and I'm going to add some definition to my cheeks. Alright, so after everything is blended, this is pretty much what it looks like. And before I set my face, I like to make sure it looks, you know, the way that I want it to. So this is a step that I actually would not recommend if you have dry skin. If you have oilier skin or normal skin, this is probably really good for you. But I like to apply the Laura Mercier powder with an eyeshadow brush actually, and just push it into the skin. I can't do a beauty blender or anything else like that because it's just extremely drying up under my eyes. And this is one of the powders that I can use under my eyes and it doesn't feel that dry. But with this particular concealer, because it's kind of self-drying, it was way too dry. So what I would actually recommend is what I'm going to do next, which is use the Charlotte Tilbury or a similar powder like this. I'm using the shade medium 2 with that same eyeshadow brush and just set it up under the eyes. This would have been a little bit better for me. Although my under eyes were not uncomfortably dry, they just felt more dry, if that makes sense. So I love this powder, by the way. I hate that it's so expensive, but you need it. So here I am again using the shade Dark 3 for the rest of my face. And so once that's finished, I use my Bobbi Brown bronzer in the shade, I believe is Deep 4. And I just put it on my cheeks to set where I put the Bobbi Brown foundation stick. And then next I'm going to do my eyes. So I'm using the Morphe Jaclyn Hill Original palette. I'm pointing to the colors that I used in order. My particular palette did not come with the shade names, but I did go back on Google and find the shade names. So I do list them as I'm using them. Right now I'm using that Laura Mercier powder as a eyeshadow base. And although my skin is dry, my eyelids are really, really oily, so I do have to set them with something. I don't like using any other type of primers, so I just find that this works for me. Alright, so next I'm going to lightly line my eyes. I started off using a pencil, but then I switched to the Stila liquid eyeliner, and I put a very, very thin line. Next, I'm using the Lancome mascara to prep my eyes for the lashes that I'm going to put on off camera. So these are the lashes that I used for this look, and I applied them off camera. And so after I do my lashes, I like to go back in and deepen my crease. I'm using the darkest shade that I just pointed to, and I just put it directly in my crease just to make it a little bit deeper. And I like to do this after I do my lashes, just so I can see what everything looks like together before I make it too dark. So next I'm using one of my favorite blushes by Nars. This is the Orgasm blush. Next, I'm gonna line my lips with Cork lip liner by MAC. Next, I'm using this Sephora cream lip stain liquid lip. I think that's what it's called, but I don't remember the exact color. So next I am using the Mario Badescu facial spray, and I love this spray because it just melts everything together. And then lastly, I'm going to use the Tatcha Skin Mist again, but this time I'll only spray the outside of my face or my cheeks. And I'm looking for something. I found it. So the last thing I do, I'm using my Charlotte Tilbury powder in medium 2, and I'm just going over my eyebrows because I don't want them to look too shiny. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed watching. Please subscribe to my channel and follow me on Instagram. See you in the next video.